Thank you very much, Lewis. Really appreciate your coverage. I'll let you open and then take questions.
Well, thank you, Paul, and thank you to all of you for the collective invite, and thank you to all of you for still turning up when you saw I was on the agenda. So, as Paul has said in his introduction, the stage we're still at is I'm still wanting to come out and listen, and I'm still wanting to then go back and think about how we move forward to get out of this. As I often say, this is a dispute which has been going on for about 4 years. But actually the root causes, if you look at the conditions which led to Sheffield Council stopping investing in its highway infrastructure, letting the highway infrastructure start to crumble, including trees, dates back from the 80s and the 90s, around the time I was born and before. So what we're dealing with together as a city is a set of very long-standing issues which have come to a head in the Streets Ahead programme, which could be a very positive thing for our city, but sadly has caused a lot of division in communities around Sheffield. So what I'm hoping to do today is to both introduce where we are and answer questions that you might have about where we are and why we're here and what is my perspective on these things. But I'm also hoping to try and convey a sense of my motives and my perspective on where I'm hoping to get to. And I'm going to feed back what I learned today and what I've learned on my previous walkabouts. I've done 2 walkabouts so far in Netheredge. And I'm going to feed that back into the next steps that we take. So I've been a councillor in Sheffield for 3 years now, for the Labour Party and also for the Cooperative Party, which tries to inform I try to use that to inform my thinking about how we should engage with politics. And I briefly represented the old Central Ward, which includes bits of Sharrow, which we might call Netheredge. And I currently represent Leaders Valley Ward, which includes Healy and Mearsbrook. And so this issue around tree replacement has been high up on my agenda for the 3 years in which I've been on the council. And I have, in my position as a local councillor, tried to convey the views of my residents on both sides of the debate and try and focus on improving the process so that residents feel that they've got a better interaction and a better dialogue with the council. And we've had fits and starts. The independent tree panel, I've heard a lot of views about that. I too have walked around trying to use the spreadsheet to understand some of the decisions that I've made when I was a local councillor. That was an attempt to try and find a more amicable way forward. And we are still here today. So I think that's all I want to say on that, is it was a process, but we have to find a new way forward. And I was offered the opportunity to join the Cabinet and to take over this portfolio about 6 or 7 weeks ago now. And my first thought was that this would be an opportunity to represent the views of my constituents who want to see this dispute drawn to a close and want to see the city move on. And I know constituents who disagree very strongly with the proposals the council has put forward and want to see a way forward. And I've got no constituents who agreed with the proposals the council brought forward, but having seen the effects on the division in the community in Mearsbrook and events in Mearsbrook, have decided that actually they want to see the council sit down and compromise. And that has very much informed my thinking. I've not set out with the answers to this because I think the process by which we find the answers is very important. So since I took on the role, I've made it a priority both to find out more about the policy from council officers to some extent. I've also sat down with Amy, but particularly with frontline Amy workers, to try and understand their perspective. But my main priority has been to come out and visit the neighbourhoods around the city and to meet campaigners like yourselves and other residents who have come across us as we've been doing the walkabouts and express their views, and try and gain an understanding of what you've been through as campaigners, but also your ideas for how we move forward. And like I said, I've visited Netheredge, I've been up to Crooks and Western Road, Crooks and Spring Hill, Riverlin, Dore, Topley, Mearsbrook, Norton, Ecclesall and Millhouses. Tomorrow morning I'm going out in Wadsley. And I've probably met several hundred people now. And the overwhelming impression I have is that like I know from my constituents in Mearsbrook, people who care about this issue are quite reasonable, are quite willing to be constructive and to engage with me, and I've been very grateful for the generosity with which people have agreed to meet and agreed to discuss this and agreed to focus, yes, on what you think has gone wrong, but also on the way forward. And so, like I said, this is part of that. I apologise, some of this you might know thoroughly, but I'll just sort of recap on where we are. We have a pause. The pause was initiated in March by Amy, so that won't cost the council in penalties for pausing the work. And the pause is committed to extending to allow us time to try and develop an alternative way forward that can command greater agreement. And we have said that we think that that agreement can be found by having compromised from all sides. And the council needs to compromise. The council needs to compromise by the new tone we've taken, by our willingness to think again. Amy needs to compromise by having the pause, by looking again at the options for the remaining trees. And when I say campaigners need to compromise, I've heard from campaigners I've met a lot of what I wanted to hear. You know, I don't think that people in this room want to save every tree, including the dead tree which is causing a danger to passing drivers. I think that you're willing to engage in a conversation about how we go forward. And so over this summer we're going to get to a point where we have developed a feasible range of options, or a starting point for discussion from the council and Amy, that will enable us to then have two sets of dialogues. One dialogue will be with local neighbourhoods and local residents in the affected areas, and then one dialogue will be the formal talks that I've been asked by STAG and other stakeholder groups to engage in. And out of that we're looking for two things. We're looking for a compromise which we can have great agreement on for the remaining trees which have been identified for replacement in the core investment period. And the greater prize is if we can find a way forward for the next 20 years with how we both maintain and improve upon Sheffield's tree stock. And you know, I've made this quite clear that the Labour Party nationally has changed its mind about PFIs, and we've now said that it's wrong to have private companies involved in the delivery of public services. It makes things too complicated, it makes things too opaque. However, one of the reasons I think it is so important to have a Labour government is because I know the difference a Labour government can make. And we are operating now under constraints. The Labour government will review PFI contracts, but it's not promised to bring them back in-house if it's too difficult to unpick the very tight agreements that have been made. And that's what we found as a council. When we tried to bring the Veolia contract back in-house, we were challenged and were unable to do so. When we're now engaging in the process of trying to bring Capita and the IT contract back in-house and refashion that service so it suits the people of Sheffield better. You know, when we can, we will. And failing that, like I say, we have to be prepared, and part of the compromise is that we might have to be working with Amy in the city for the next 20 years. So it is very important for us to find a way forward by which we can engage with Amy and get what we want out of them. Because when I've met the Amy workers, many of whom spent many years working for Sheffield Council and were transferred over, I think it is possible to have a sense of public duty and build a sense of public ethos within them, the people who live in Sheffield and work in Sheffield, and also value our communities and got involved in arboricultural work because they want trees as well. That's part of what I see us needing to do for the next few decades. The other part though is around using, if we can, and this is crucial, if we can make progress, if we can rebuild relations, I think there's a real opportunity for us to harness the energy that's been generated by very innovative campaign work like the Lost Worlds, I think I was just mentioned the Lost Worlds initiative, and other campaign work. If we can put that energy into community tree work and into protecting and enhancing our green space, I think that's a real opportunity for us as a city to turn a page on this and start to move forward together. And so I am very optimistic. I am more optimistic after my first 6 or 7 weeks than I was at the start, which is good. I am also more aware of the difficulties that we will face in doing this and in rebuilding relations and rebuilding trust. But just because it's going to be difficult doesn't mean we can't do it and doesn't mean we can't try. And so I'm looking forward this summer, when we're at a point where I think we've got a good enough proposal to form a starting point and to have meaningful conversations about it, and it's set out in the right way, with clarity about some of the decisions that underpin it, and the clarity about the options there. I will be bringing that forward, and you know, you as residents and campaigners will have an opportunity to feed in and discuss how we move forward on that. So I think I'm ready to answer any questions that people might have rather than carrying on. Do you want to, or shall I?
I'm happy for you
Yeah,
to
yeah.
do it, John.
Okay.
I'll have to watch.
Shall we take these in threes? Is that okay? Or one by one? How we make best use of time?
I just want to say this all sounds very positive, but I don't understand why it's taken so long to come to this point. Because the tree campaigners, I mean, I'm not really involved at the moment, but I was involved at the beginning. And what I know is the tree campaigners have done masses of painstaking research and have always been ready to engage. And I remember being at this meeting of the council where, and basically the councils were not listening. And I think there's a cultural problem in Sheffield Labour Party. I think they basically have absolute power, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. They haven't listened, and they have got more and more draconian rather than engaging. To be fair, I've forgotten his name. Was it Terry Fox? I think he tried. He actually tried, but after that it went from bad to worse. And then we had this spectre of basically an army of nightclub bouncers on the streets. Fine, go out to a nightclub, you expect to find bouncers, but not on your residential streets. 30 odd police, people being arrested for blowing a little trumpet, and now, even now, they've redone the injunctions. Surely, if we're going to start to talk, and I think it's brilliant that you are here and you want to change. My first question is, how are you going to change the culture of, frankly, I think some of the basically fossils. I'm sorry, I'm being rude, I'm sorry, but it's true. They are not receptive, they play every card under the sun, they're bigoted, they play the class card, oh, you live in the leafy suburbs. They dampen debate by they say you don't care about child poverty. Well, actually we do. Lots of us do lots of other things apart from trees. Well, you know, it's a debate stopper. They won't listen. I've been told by one councillor, we've heard quite enough from you. I'm not a child, I'm a voter, I'm a resident, I pay council tax. People should be listening, and there is a problem in the culture of the Labour Party, which I think is a culture of a party that has been in power for too long and it's completely set in its ways. So that has to change, and I'd like to know how you think. I can think I know why it's changing, and I think the recent elections might have something to do with it, and also the tenacity of the tree campaigners. But how are you going to change that culture? Because I think there must be a way, because surely for Amy, it's not good for Amy to have this bad publicity, and I think Amy might be willing to compromise, possibly. So I think, how are you going to change the culture? And also, couldn't a good start be withdrawing those injunctions as a gesture of goodwill? Let's talk. Jaw, jaw, jaw is better than war, war, war. Okay? I know this is boring.
Shall I take another question and then do a round of three?
My first question is sort of related to this point, which is that I very much welcome your willingness to come out and talk to people, but it would be really helpful, even after you had gone on Radio Sheffield and started talking about a more conciliatory approach and compromising things, the council press office were still putting out statements that talked about dangerous and violent protesters and how unreasonable we all were. If the council, not just you, but the council as a body, councillors and officers, are genuinely seeking some sort of conciliation and compromise, it would be really helpful if, first of all, the council press office and official statements stopped talking about dangerous, violent and unreasonable protesters, etc., and started acknowledging that we are reasonable people, and that going back to the days of the Rustlings Road campaign, people started by trying to talk.
They did.
And the reason we're 3 years later, we have ended up with people standing under trees, breaching the injunction, or we've ended up with an injunction, is because the council have refused to listen and acknowledge the strength of feeling and the massive amount of expert evidence that what the council is doing is wrong. Secondly, I would like to come back to something you said right at the very beginning. You said that the root cause of this problem is years of underinvestment as a result of funding cuts, etc. I completely agree that Sheffield has suffered from underinvestment in the roads. My family used to make jokes about, cart tracks that I thought I was going to Sheffield, driving in Sheffield. Completely agree that the city has suffered from that underinvestment for various reasons. But can we actually come back to the root cause of the issue with the trees? Is that a survey was done in 2007-2008 by Elliott, and that survey showed that a maximum of 1,000 trees needed some sort of remedial work, which might include felling them. But that survey also used forestry terms about mature and over-mature, which are terms that you use when you're growing timber as a crop. Mature and over-mature, if you're mature as an adult, doesn't mean we're about to chop you down. So can we acknowledge that the root cause of this problem is that someone misused those figures, whether that was deliberate or through genuine misunderstanding, and that got turned into a target to fell for 17,500 trees. Now, you might say it's not a target, but either way, there are either financial incentives or financial penalties for aiming whether they achieve that target or don't achieve it. So can we acknowledge that that is the root cause of this problem right at the very beginning?
Okay.
Sorry, that went on longer than I had.
No, that's absolutely fine. Well, those are three very apt questions, and I think with the first one about the Labour Party culture and about local government more generally, to some extent that's a political question. So I apologise if I stray into a slightly political answer, but I think that one of the biggest explanations for what's going on in local government is that it has been cut, in the case of Sheffield, in half in the past 8 years for no other reason than the global economy dipped, and the party that formed government decided to take it out on people across the United Kingdom rather than take responsibility as a government. So when councillors in large cities like Sheffield, which have to deal with deeply ingrained problems about poverty and inequality, feel under attack, it's because we are under attack by our government, which is taking away the money that we used to see going into estates in my ward like Leeds Valley or estates down the road like Lansdowne. And that makes it very difficult when you're dealing with programmes like Streets Ahead and decisions about them. Is our range of decision making has been limited by the formation of government, which has subjected local government to attack. And I think there's a debate within our party which is evolving around and evolving in the wake of the recent elections, which is about, well, for 5 years and then for 2 years we might have felt, okay, if we can be the dented shield against the government, then Labour will be in government and they'll turn the situation around. And that's shifted, and partly because of work of the other party of which I'm a member, the Cooperative Party, we're now looking more, very seriously about longer term questions about what can councils do for themselves, what can they do to develop community wealth and to provide sustainable long-term economies in that way. And so there is a change of thinking there within the wider parties about attitudes to local government. And and like I say, I would like to see was, the question about how we form a more constructive relationship going forward to link into that wider questioning about our role in local government. So I hope that at least shares my outlook on that. And The second question about the injunctions. Now this is one of the difficulties, of course, in us finding a way forward. I think this is a very serious business, and I'm not interested in gestures. I'm interested in us finding a serious way forward and a serious solution. I think that the root cause, or the cause of this dispute, is the proposals around trees. And I think there's a lot of wider issues which have been touched upon and we might discuss tonight that have been highlighted in the course of this. But the way we start to rebuild things is to try and find an answer about trees. It started with trees and we can come to an end of it with trees. And that's what my overriding focus is on, is how do we get to a position this summer where we can have a conversation about what we're doing with trees over the next year, over the next 20 years, and forward on that. So I don't think a gesture on legal business would have been enough to bring us to an end. And I think we've also tried to say clearly that it is our intention, it's our, of course, you know, like I say, I've seen the division this has caused in a community like Mearsbrook. It is our intention to create the conditions in which an injunction is no longer necessary. That can't be done overnight, and that's not straightforward to do.
Does that mean the pause is going to continue much longer while these discussions can take place then? Because if there's a pause, there won't be a use for the injunction because they'll be protesting because there won't be any felling. Is the pause going to continue whilst this dialogue is instituted?
Yes, we want to use the pause to come up with a solution and a compromise. And so the issue with the injunction is that the injunction has the date for renewal has fallen on the 25th of July. And so the decision has to be taken now, marked against the progress we have made. And although we have tried to change...
You don't start a conversation with a big stick. That's not a conversation.
Yeah. And I think that would be a much...
That is not a good start, is it, for us?
I think that would be... I would find that different if we were proposing to introduce an injunction.
Yeah.
And we're not proposing to introduce an injunction. We have a decision about letting the injunction lapse.
You said you could change the injunction.
I'm quite happy to work through to yourselves. I do have the lady's question at the back to answer, though. So we can return to this. And shall I put you up there and return to it when you ask me more questions on it? But like I say, I think that the issue is around the injunction renewal has come up now. It's not a decision about introducing the injunction, it's about a renewal. So that's the third point around the press and about the comms. Well, what is absolutely in my power is what I say, and I have used every opportunity I have, and I used my opportunity on Radio Sheffield last Friday to highlight how constructive engagement is possible and is starting to take place. So when Toby Foster asked me, well, look, these campaigners don't want to compromise, my answer was to jump straight in to say, actually, I think we can find a compromise, and that's what I've clearly heard when I've gone around the city.
But that's unfortunately at odds with what the council as a body is putting out. It would be really helpful if you as a cabinet member could agree with your fellow cabinet members that the policy is going to be, the policy that the officers enact is going to be that you collectively stop referring to us as violent and dangerous and all the negative connotations that are still unfortunately coming out when, as you've seen, we are a reasonable bunch of people.
Well, and I think the example you're referring to was an article on the Yorkshire Post, if I'm right, which quoted that quote. And
well, that's one of them.
Yeah,
which the reporter confirmed with, although it was a relatively old statement, the reporter confirmed with the council the day before publication that was still the stance.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is why I think it's so important that we have face-to-face meetings like tonight, why we have face-to-face meetings going on walkabouts, is that that was written up as the council reissuing a statement about. the question that was put to the council was, can the council publish the information yet? My answer the officers gave is no. The
Yeah, but
previous
the answer
position
was no
stands.
because of these
Yeah. Well,
terrible
so
nasty protesters, and you confirmed that that was still, the answer was no because of the terrible nasty protesters.
well, I don't quite agree on the nuance about, but I think the important thing is that's been.
It was quite clear. And
No,
like I say, it would be really
Yeah.
helpful if you
Yeah.
create, the policy creator actually inform the press office that that is the policy.
Well, I mean, and I have done this. I've set out to my officers, and as Paul said in his intro, well, I was pleased to hear in Paul's introduction that some of this is being put into practice. But the thing I'm trying to say is we can discuss the nuances about how that article in particular, and that's the only article to my knowledge where this is an issue. We could discuss the nuances of how that came about, but the general tone and the main thrust of what we're doing is trying to be positive and constructive about how we go forward.
The tone from you is very positive and constructive, but the tone from your colleagues is not.
Yes.
I think, but moving on, so Rebecca
Yeah.
makes a really important point. So the past is the past, and I understand why you've got to be careful about what you say about what happened to lead to that Yorkshire Coast article and a couple of other articles. So I think Rebecca makes a point that you need to consider, which is about, for the future, can we be more careful as a council in terms of how you criticise or vote the campaign? That's just the point that she's making. I think that's a really valid point.
Yes, exactly. Let's
But
note that.
not just you personally,
Yeah.
but also your colleagues in the cabinet and the rest of the council.
So let's note that one then, because I agree with it as formulated. And then the other. Sorry, I will get to I will get to other questions, but then there is a very important question, isn't there, about your question about the 17,500. I could give you a very straightforward answer, which is that it's not target. The challenge for us is how we come up to a position where we agree and we see eye to eye on it. Since I have become cabinet member, I have seen the more nuanced answer is, since I have become cabinet member, I have seen nothing to suggest that is the case. I've seen nothing to make me doubt the statement of the council that it is not a target and it's not being acted upon as a target. I've seen that the council has a criteria-based approach which builds upwards. The Elliott review was reviewed again when the programme started, and on a case-by-case basis where the trees are up to, case by case.
With Elliott, there was the signing of the contract with the 17,500 tree target, and then there was the big resurvey, which was on the back of the 17,500 tree target. And I really don't, unless there is another bit of the contract that says that it isn't a target, I don't really see how else you can interpret the service provider shall replace 17,500 trees by the end of the term. Shall, not may, shall. That is a target. There are either financial incentives for meeting it or financial penalties for not meeting it. Shall is a target. It is a direct instruction, not permission, not insurance, but an instruction to replace 17,500 trees. And it is sure that between that and the totally unreasonable and unnecessary requirement for a continuous and straight curb line, which is not a requirement of the Highways Act, those two things are what have massively threatened a huge number of our trees. Thousands of trees are being condemned for tiny deviation in the curb, for example. It is surely not beyond the wit of man to alter some of the specifications in the contract so that you're paying the same amount of money for a slightly different service.
Or use the engineering solutions.
Yeah, but actually, all the business about the 60s and particularly the damaging ones are criteria that have been used to provide an excuse for felling to meet the 17,500 tree target. So can we come back to changing that target and changing the requirement for a continuous curb? And like I say, I know it's a big complex contract, council officers have accused me of being suggested that I'm naive for suggesting it can be renegotiated. I'm sure it can. Other bits of the contract have been altered. Why can't this particular bit, these two bits? And I would suggest that those should be the aspects that the council and Amy should be talking about changing.
I think the best way of summing that up is I have a previous point, which is this is something I have heard when I've gone out and about to meet with people involved in the campaign, that and it's something I want to work on to try and find reassurance that the council's interpretation of this is the case, and that this isn't a target. And I'll
Those are the fundamental crux points that everything else stems from.
Yeah. I've taken it on board that we have to find
address
reassurance.
that. Everything else is just a bit of window dressing. You have to address those two aspects of the contract. Those key service requirements, whatever they're called, in the contract.
Okay. So the other point here as well, and I just think that it's important to say this. I've said this in the council chamber. I'm not a PFI contract lawyer. I don't want to be. You shouldn't have to be a PFI contract lawyer to become a local councillor. What you should have to be, if you want to become a local councillor, is committed to representing your constituent and being challenging when you, in finding out the information that's necessary to perform your duties. So I have said to officers that something that has come up again, as I've been going around, is the doubt around this statement of the council that this is not a target, and it's something I want to work to find reassurance, because I think that's really important to us moving forward, that we understand we're on the same page. So that's what I want to say on that. Is something I will look at. It's something where I disagree based on the evidence given to me, and that's the evidence I have to work with. But
Can I just chip in there, because again, this is a key point that Rebecca made, and we've had a brief discussion about it ourselves. So I've heard an explanation from, for example, Paul Billington, that sounds reasonable in theory, that explains why this contract obligation is more like an insurance policy. And it does sound reasonable verbally, but actually there's no written evidence of that. So as part of the commitment to publish more of the PFI contract, can we at least see that explanation that gives us more trust that it really is a bit like an insurance contract rather than a target or obligation? That's a commitment. Can we try and see that?
well, my commitment is that we'll find a way of offering reassurance on this.
That's right.
There's no point in me rehearsing, as you said, there's no point in me rehearsing the justification of it. Just the second point about standards. I'll try and do this as quickly as possible. The reason that there's standards in there that might not be the legal minimum of the Highways Act is because those are the standards that the Department of Transport asks for.
No, they aren't. Can I refer you to the... Sorry, no, you think I'm butting in.
Yeah, well...
February 2017, the Midland Valley Road petition was presented. Are you there?
I was probably there.
Yeah.
I think I was.
So I presented that petition, and I included extracts from I'm horrified that I can even quote this. UK Roads Liaison Group Code of Practice for a Well-Managed Highway, which is very clear about the need or not for continuous curb and the need to work around trees and acknowledge their benefits and work around them. You don't automatically chop them down. And that guidance, that code of practice, which is supposed to be complied with by all highways authorities, is in part one of the contributing and endorsing bodies is the Department for Transport. So those are the standards that are to be complied with, and they very specifically say you don't need a continuous curb and you work around trees.
Okay. So
if you want me to send you again those extracts, I'd be very happy to.
So to phrase it in a different way, hopefully slightly more neutrally, when the council agreed this PFI programme with the Department of Transport, these are the standards that were agreed as part of the investment offered. That's as a statement of fact. That is how it came about. So, well, basically my answer is, we're looking to try and find ways of compromising, and we will look at ways of compromising.
The contract could be amended to now be in line with current standards, because surely you don't have a 25-year contract that sets in stone what standards you're going to work to and has no flexibility for complying with updated standards, new thinking, expert advice about, it might be that in 10 years' time, actually we decide that we should have, Dutch-style cycle paths that are completely separated from the road, and we're just going to not be able to implement those in Sheffield because we've got an ancient contract that's totally out of step with modern thinking. And that's what we've got with this requirement for a continuous curve, and also as a side issue, almost a side issue, but this ridiculous 17,500 tree target.
The gentleman up front added, I think you were.
I think the lady just speaking has been very eloquent and points to the area. I was involved early on. I saw the tree forms, and I think Lewis, just to say thanks very much for turning up. Councillor Fox also had the guts to turn up on our street in the early days. What has really disturbed me are two things. The first one is the immediate thing: detailed, accurate, scientific argument with multiple pages of reference, both scientific and also reference to traffic acts and arrests presented in the tree form and to council. And what shocked me, I considered it to be European standard presentation. It was stunning. Right? I have some scientific qualifications, and I have also worked with multinationals, so I know the other side of the game. I was appalled to see that utterly ignored. You left Rustling's Road people with no choice. You left all these campaigners with no choice. When somebody actually, and I use the word, this is what it was, Lewis, it was pure ignorance. And not only was it pure ignorance, it was very upsetting, because I love this city, despite my accent, I love the city, right? And to see wonderful people presenting in such a detailed manner, and then to worry that the council officers and the councillors don't have the expertise to do the job, that's what freaked me. I even proposed at the time, you need to reference these people because they seem to be the only resource you have to help. And you, even yourself, Lewis, are getting a little bit updated on some of the facts here, because all the science has gone by the by, and all anybody should be following in this room is the science, the truth, right? The other issue that has really concerned me recently, and it has become very worrying for me, has been, as Nikki here suggested, the apparent behaviour of a group of Labour councillors within the Labour authority, okay? Now, I'm a past Labour voter. But what I'm seeing, and it really concerns me about the future economic development of this city, this is beyond trees at this stage. I'm far more worried, right? I'm seeing a group of Labour councillors I don't believe are fit for purpose to bring the city jobs. I'm not making political points, right? I love the city. I want the city to develop. But I just see people in Dublin looking at this. And I'm just wondering, how are they going to bring any investment into the city when they see this going on? And they see this sort of, and I have to use the word again, ignorance of science and this sort of behaviour. This wouldn't be happening in Dublin. They don't worry about curb edges here. They put a tarmac edge in. They don't let them take out trees. So that's the second thing. And I've got another, even deeper worry now. It's just the behaviour of the South Yorkshire Police. I saw emails, and this must disturb you. You're a politician. You believe in democracy, and proper people have to be accountable. I've seen an email, and I had to reread it, where Amy sent the operational instructions and the legal policy instructions to our police force.
Yes.
A Spanish-owned multinational instructing our police force. How is that democratic? Lewis, I don't know.
After the commissioner said not to get involved as well.
Indeed, and that really worries me. That is a deep concern for me. So now this is no longer about trees for me. This is about what has happened to our Labour Party in council. Have they got so moribund? What has happened to my South Yorkshire Police I used to trust, and now I find them being lied to about a punch and the rest? I don't know. The other thing that concerns me, Lewis, is you're listening. Just like Councillor Fox. Nice guy. I disagree with him, but he listened, came to our street. But what concerns me is you're standing here, you're listening, I can see you're listening, and I appreciate that. But what authority do you have? You are up, in my mind, I'll be straight with you, in my mind, you are up against a rather backward, locked in group of Labour councillors, or maybe a leadership that's locked in and old-fashioned, which isn't going to damage just the trees in Sheffield, which is constant, which I feel is a danger to the economy of Sheffield. Because how are these people going to talk to businessmen in the coming year? And I've heard a couple of stories from businessmen, which I can't repeat, which just shocked me. 2 other countries chasing businessmen, and Sheffield basically tells them, I can't go into detail. So issues, just quite simply ignoring the scientific evidence, failing to admit you made a mistake. Yeah? A Labour council there that is probably no longer fit for purpose in terms of its leadership. Yeah? A South Yorkshire police force that needs an independent authority controlling it. No multinational. That's how we got to Russell's Road. And then the last question, which is probably the one that interests me the most, Lewis, is do you actually have any power? I don't mean to be insulting, but you're up against, and if you're a good boy, good lad, good man, sorry, it says Irish. Yeah, you may be very well intentioned, but I'm wondering how much are you aware of what you're up against inside that council? And I'll stop. I didn't even want to talk today, because this is, as everybody will know here, very intimidating, very stressful, very anxiety-inducing. I'm just a resident.
People won't mind if I take on those 5 weighty questions.
No, I'm just happy.
Well, okay. The first point. Our officers form policy and judgment based on their professional expertise, and like I say, it's very important to me that one of the ways our system of government works is that I help use them to put our policies into practice. But I do want to think about how we can bring wider expertise in. Second point about Labour councillors and about the wider picture, and I think here I would like to make a slightly wider point around a question I often get, which was alluded to before, which is, are you just doing this because of election results? My answer to that, very sincerely, is we are doing this because this is the right thing to do in office, governing this city, is to try and find another way forward that can bring communities back together and can allow our city to move forward. And at the end of that, and I said this when I was on the walkabout in Mearsbrook with my constituency, Cllr Valley. In 2 years' time, my constituency, Cllr Valley, will have the opportunity to elect me or elect somebody else, and that's up to them. It's up to them to judge where we've got up to. And I hope Jim and Maroof won't be if I'm saying that's exactly the same in Netheredge and Sharrow. That's how our local democracy and accountability works. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to do what we think is the right thing. And my predecessors in post and the administration previously, and I think the previous Liberal Democrat administration have been trying to do the right thing as they see it. And at this point, we've decided we think the right thing now is to try and find a compromise that enables us to move forward. This shouldn't be a surprise at all, but I was appointed to the cabinet by Julie. I am here because Councillor Julie Dorr, as leader of our council and chair of our cabinet, has appointed me, and I support Julie in being our leader, and Julie supports me in being here today. And I have the support. You've got 2 of my colleagues here. I have the support of my fellow councillors in the Labour group with doing this. Some Labour councillors might have different views, and they have an opportunity to express those views. I am the lead policymaker and the lead spokesperson for our policies around environment and street scene in Sheffield. And what I say is the position of our cabinet and our administration in governing the council. So that's important to say. The question, then you asked a question, 2 questions at the end about authority and do I have the power? Well, I think I've covered the authority point. I have the authority to try and bring this try and find a way forward. That was the instructions when I took a post. Is can you try and find a compromise that lets us move forward? And that's what I've been trying to do for the past 6-7 weeks. That's why I'm here today, to try and put that into practice the best I can with the support of my colleagues. And I think we do have the power to turn this around. I think we also have the power based on what progress we can make together. And like I've said, the constructive engagement by campaigners, constructive engagement by Amy, is part will give us different choices and different ways forward to what went before. And so I have the power of my office, but what will be more powerful is if we can come together and find a way forward which commands greater agreement. With South Yorkshire Police, I'm afraid my thought on this is to say, I think Dr. Alan Billings, who I know well, as he lives in my ward in Walkley, and previously represented Broome Hall, which I used to represent, and I've known Alan for a few years now, and he has a very difficult job. If you think sorting out trees is difficult, his job is sorting out South Yorkshire Police and the legacy of issues there. That's very difficult, and I think he's doing his utmost in trying to bring about that change. And in terms of democratic accountability, I think I mean to say sincerely, I think I owe it to him to say you should direct your points to Alan and ask Alan to take them up as our representative as police commissioner. And behind the scenes, on stage, he will do everything he can to sort out South Yorkshire Police. I might, the individual cases is a difficult thing for me to comment on as well, and it would be a difficult thing for Alan to comment on. His focus is on getting governance structures within South Yorkshire Police back on track. That's why he's brought in neighbourhood and community policing again and stuff like that.
Lewis,
Yes.
A comment about the police. So, Jim Stanky. As well as being a local councillor like Lewis, I was appointed 6 weeks ago today. And my cabinet responsibility is for neighbourhoods and community safety. And I think I need to say that, though as Lewis has said, that in terms of that's an issue for Alan Billings, but from a local authority perspective, I think we're very clear that the police are the police and should have their kind of, in a way, operational autonomy that goes up the line of command, and then is actually accountable in terms of to the police, Alan Billings as the police and crime commissioner. I think from a local authority point of view, we would be concerned if there was any kind of interference in that. But I have, on the whole, have the confidence in the police decisions that we made around community safety in this city.
The emails are available on.
No. What I'm saying is I'm agreeing with you, and I think that we need to kind of ensure that those kind of things, that there is a clarity in terms of who's that. There should be not the actual or the perception fact of that kind of external interference in the police.
And the overriding point as well is as I touched on before, is we're now trying to get back to a point where the police don't feel they need to take the decisions to come out on the streets and be involved, where we don't need an injunction to carry on, because that's what we're aiming to get back to. So
that's very dependent on your authority and your ability to push that policy through that Labour group and the council. Because otherwise, I think in September, we don't know where we're heading.
yeah,
I don't want to see this again. I don't want to see residents being assaulted on our streets.
like I say, I'm very optimistic, and I'm very optimistic I'll get support of my colleagues in moving this forward. So, the next one.
I want to say first of all that I don't have any confidence in the process that you've outlined, and that's not because I don't trust you, it's because I don't trust your officers. And I think Rebecca's demonstrated really well tonight that people in this campaign have had 3 years of becoming experts in this field, with the help of national and international expertise in this field. And if the meetings being held are between Amy and SCC and you're not there, or we don't have a political representative there, and you're not talking to people in this campaign during that process, then I think it's doomed to failure, because I've listened to Paul Billington. We have recordings of Paul Billington on the streets making totally incorrect statements about highway laws, about curbs, and so on. So I don't trust your officers. Having encountered your officers for 3 years on our streets, I don't trust them. And I don't trust a process where this campaign and where elected representatives are not at that table at this stage. I'm not interested in you coming back in 3 months' time and telling us that this is the new plan. We want to be involved in the negotiations now, because they'll be doomed to failure, I think, otherwise. And the expertise in this room and in this campaign ought to be being harnessed now, not later, not down the line. There are people here who are telling you things today that you don't seem to be aware of. And I believe, or correct me if I'm wrong, that what you're telling us is what your officers have told you. Rebecca's correct. You can't both be correct, right? So I think you need to revisit the process that you're involved in, and it's not good enough for the campaign to be the ragtag and bobtails at the end of some consultation between people who have consistently not been, well, let's say, been economical with the truth. The second thing I want to ask is if you've actually read the contract, or whether that contract is going to be made public, or whether any of us can actually see it. Have you read it? Will it be being made public? I want to ask you about this, which came through my door yesterday, the Ipsos Mori poll, used last year to make all sorts of statements about what a wonderful job Amy were doing, and to try and counter things that we'd put out. What's it being used for this year? Do you know what the response rate for it was last year? Do you know the basis on which the statements were made last year? 4,000 went out last year and under 1,000 came back. And on that basis, statements were made that, you know, the vast majority of people in Sheffield believed. It's not true. So please can you find out, if you don't know, what this is for and how your press department intend to use it. I want to ask you whether you are content for people who've been inside a barrier for 3 minutes asking for an explanation about why another barrier has been put around the outside of them when they were already outside the barrier. Are you content that those people should be threatened with imprisonment? Because I became much more active in this campaign when people started telling me that anti-trade union legislation was going to be used on the road next to me. And I'm disgusted that a Labour council even thought of going down that route when, you know, everything in my body says those laws that were brought in to smash the miners ought to be thrown out and you shouldn't be using them. And the last point I want to make is a small one, maybe to everybody here, but it's a huge one. There are children and grandchildren. I don't believe you can replace trees, but the tiny little saplings that you've put in now are dying because they're not being watered. And the contract says, as our understanding of the contract, the information we've had through Freedom of Information request, says that they need lots more water than your current contractors are giving them. And we're going out and watering them. So I want to know, why is there this mismatch between what was supposed to be the requirement and what's actually happening? And when you talk about Amy, the other problem I have is that you were saying that, you know, you have people who worked in-house and they care about the city and they're invested in all of this. They're not the people chopping down our trees. The people chopping down our trees are Acorn, and they're bringing in people from Southampton, from Bristol and from Cardiff. I would love to see it go back in-house to the people who've tried their best to look after our trees for generations. But they're not the people who are doing the job now. And to you know, to give the impression that that is the case is not true. Some of the Amy workers will not be involved. And the council have lost awards that they should have had because of their involvement in this contract. So yes, certainly get it back to Amy and get Acorn out of this city and get those security guards out of the city, because I'm sick of seeing my friends beaten up on our streets while the police stand by with impunity. That's not acceptable, whether it's trees, whether it's industrial boots, whatever it is. That is not acceptable behaviour on the streets of Sheffield, and you should not be endorsing it.
Well, I just want to say, before Annette spoke, I was thinking of this point, and then Annette pretty much said it, but many other things as well. I do not see how this is going to work, what you're trying to do, unless there is a structure for it. And I think there has to be a structure, as Annette was saying, whereby certain tree campaigners are involved, giving expertise, involved in the negotiations. Otherwise, it will all just be, it won't work, because people will give you the wrong information. There will be no power, if you like, on our part. And I think you can harness the energy and expertise of the tree campaigners, but I think there has to be a structure for that. And I think, you know, Councillor Fox did try, but it didn't really work. But something that works this time, something that works, it has to happen. And we just cannot see a repeat of the Stasi-like, frankly, activities of Sheffield Labour Council. It can't happen. The surveillance, the bouncers on the street, the 30 police where some poor bugger was murdered in Pittsmore. I mean, I'm not saying if the police had been over there, it wouldn't have happened, but what about priorities? I'm a psychiatrist, right? I've done mental health assessments. I had to go to the police station to justify why we needed the police to do a mental health assessment of somebody sort of running around with a knife or whatever. I know how stretched they are. So what are they doing? Deploying 30 of them. I counted them. 30 of them for a few sort of people.
OAPs.
Yeah, basically. I mean, look at the eight. I mean, how fair is it? For God's sake. There's hardly any of us under 50, are there? A lot of us are a lot older than
There
that.
have younger people on the streets with this regularly though. They just don't like it. We have younger people on the streets with this, they just don't like meetings.
But they're not violent, you know, they're not.
We're the entire people who are there on the streets every day.
Shall I take that question from the back and then do this
Yeah, I'll
round?
be very quick and try to be concise. I can only speak from my own experience, and to be honest, I don't think that's even about the trees. I think that we've reached a societal crisis today because this problem is happening everywhere. There is a mayor in France who's trying to sue me for defamation because I wrote a song about what he's doing there, the same thing as here. It's happening everywhere. It's happening in Liverpool, it's happening in Bristol, it's happening everywhere. We just have to look around and maybe not focus on the World Cup and what Trump does, but this is happening absolutely everywhere, and this is not. It's been at least 5 years, 5, 6, 7 years. I mean, I know that you could have a very important part in this whole problem, in this whole matter. To my opinion, society has changed, and we are just discovering what people are doing. We live in the world of information. The information and the truth will be known whatsoever. And I do know that yourself, when you talk to your officers, sorry, I'm not pointing at you, when you talk to your officers, you know whether they're telling the truth or not. I'm only here ready to ask you to consider that you have a role as a man and also as a human. And the man society that's trying to live within our man perception, I don't think that's sustainable. I don't think that the thought process that comes from these considering the council is sustainable at a time where we need to consider our environment as primordial, because our environment, well, it makes our life. It decides our thoughts, it decides on everything. So that's what I'm just here to do. Just to tell you, you have a very important position, and it could solve the whole problem. So forget the trees, forget Julie, forget ambitions, forget people. That's what I'm asking. Forget everything you've heard. You know in yourself what to do. And I think that if there's something to say against these guys, because you probably have quite a lot of information on them, and there are going to be greater perspective for you if it is a lot of people in this room rather than a few officers that are only bothered about their money. That's what I'm saying.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, I think in terms of setting aside ambition, the ambition that we need to have is to find a way forward. Absolutely. And
There's no time.
I want to pick up on a few of these points. And so I understand how strongly feelings are held. I don't agree that it is constructive or necessarily accurate to, you know, with terms like Stasi or with Nick Clegg's previous comments about Putin's Russia. I think that does a disservice to, you know, to journalists who are shot dead for holding Putin's Russia to account. We can both acknowledge that this is an issue, a difficult issue which Sheffield needs to come to terms with and move on with, and not reach for those comparisons.
There's an irony about a Labour council, though, as Annette said, you know, using this sort of degree of surveillance, force, and anti-trade union legislation on peaceful protesters, and then on the one hand, and on the other hand, lauding quite rightly, the Kinder Scout people. That doesn't go well. It's not good from a Labour council. It does make you think. It doesn't matter who's in power. It's Labour, Tory. They're all. You start to think they're all as bad as each other once they get, you know, the bit between their teeth. It doesn't look good, and I hope that you can see the irony of that. Hence my use of the word Stasi-esque. I mean, I'm slightly tongue-in-cheek, but huge, big, burly guys with cameras on the streets dealing with basically a bunch of pensioners.
Cannot underestimate
assaulting women.
You cannot underestimate how intimidating that is, and how that comes across to. These are residents, they're not protesters, they're residents. I mean, these people, they may not mean to be intimidating, but they are very intimidating, right? And then something else, I'm trying not to talk here, but I'm going to bloody ask this, right? I heard that there'd been a conversation with CAMS and social services about assisting in the tree protest. Now, somebody was a little bit interested in that area. That really upset me. And it really upset me to see a police officer use somebody's son as a weapon in one of those protest sites. Now, you can see some emotion in me here now, because I'm involved in trying to help traumatized children under arrest. And I'd like you to, I was too scared, too nervous to have the guts to put in a Freedom of Information request to find out whether somebody had been having an explicit meeting with CAMS and with social services to see if they could use that as leverage in the protests. But that's the impression we had.
Yeah.
And I see pause. Now that, as somebody who has seen traumatized children, right, and who knows how long they have to wait for CAMS to even blink, 12 to 18 months, to hear that somebody in the council might be actually trying to manipulate CAMS to come out, and I'm emotional because I see the impact in these children. And this is probably the reason I'm here, right? Lewis, find out if that's been going on, because that speaks into the same concern I have with the South Yorkshire Police, an abuse of power. It's beyond the trees. When I heard that stuff, when I heard that, I thought, my God, this is no longer about trees. This is about democracy. It's just like what your man down there is saying, it's about personal ethics. It's about everybody has a personal responsibility. This news, this is meant to be mentioned on the news item, Paul's noting there about the CAMS volunteers. And then I heard something else, and I saw the police using a situation on the street with a woman and a child. And that seriously, that is where you end up in a situation where your population starts disconnecting from that authority and saying, actually, we don't belong here anymore. You guys aren't actually on our side. You guys are on somebody else's side, but it's not us.
And there was no regard at all for the children who were coming and going from their playgroup whilst there was violence being committed on women on Mearsbrook Park Road on January the 22nd. So when the lady talks about Stalinesque or Stasi, she's absolutely right. We've seen brutality on the streets, we've seen children disregarded, and ironically, when social services were brought out, and my understanding is that the mass teams, they were invited by their managers for volunteers to come forward. Ironically, they were brought out for a boy who had left school early because the boiler had broken. And ironically, the same family had been waiting 8 weeks for the same maths worker to go into their school to assess another child in their family.
That is abuse of power.
And Lewis, we've also had representatives of the council writing to people's employers to try and get them sacked as well and disciplined, and that's not on. That's not the Labour Party I want to be part of.
Well, I'm happy to take further speakers. But we're now at a point where I'm kind of in your hands. I can go through the points
Could answer the questions
that have been raised.
Great. Thank you.
The second thing is that what I wanted to do was have ideas about how to move forward. What I interpret from a lot of this is when you're sharing with me past experience, you're sharing with me things that you don't want to recur and you want us to move on.
But I'm asking you to look at the process, and that is going forward.
Yeah.
I'm sharing it to give you a better picture than the one that you reflected back to us, which actually didn't fit with what my experience was, so I hope you've heard.
Okay, thank you. So, in terms of the process then, so that is looking forward. the walkabouts I've been doing, our meeting tonight is slightly more formal, but you know, these are just initial conversations. I have though been trying to gauge a sense, and there is a question open to you as a local campaign group about what you want to see, and I've not.
Surely
If you
a
will,
few
would you mind if I finish?
Should I explain?
I think I understand. I think I have confidence in this is my sense of how we work forward. As was said, we've had previous attempts with Tree Forum and the Independent Tree Panel to try and rebuild this, and I don't think. When I came in, I sort of knew that, you know, instantly coming out with any structure, sort of rebooting the Independent Tree Panel, for example, would be an obvious way to try and find a new way forward. And I knew when I came in that those options weren't worth considering. What I'm trying to do is to have, and I would say I'm still undecided. I have some ideas about how the talks look. And I've made a commitment that we will have talks, but I'm still undecided about the exact details because I still want to meet with representatives of campaign groups to get an understanding of what you want to get out of it and how you want to get out of it.
I don't think you understood the point I was making, which is I'm interrupting. Shortly after your appointment, I was in the town hall and there's a meeting, people going to a meeting with Brian Lodge, the chair of the ITP, Paul Billington and Darren Ben. They were having a meeting while you were first in post. You didn't appear to be there. If those meetings are ongoing, are you attending them? Are they ongoing? Are there any proposals to widen the representation that's there? So that we can actually get some accurate information for people like Rebecca who know what they're talking about, because we've been doing this for 3 years now. So that when you come back with some proposals, we don't go, actually, I'm sorry, you've mistaken that. That's what Paul Billington told us on Chipping House Road a year and a half ago, but it was incorrect, and Howey's actually says this. This is my worry, that if you are not in there, we're not in there at this stage, looking at the proposals, then I think I've no confidence that the proposals that come out are going to be any better than what we've got now.
Can I, sorry, I know you didn't want to interrupt you, but this is related to the point Annette was making. I keep picking up some reluctance to have, not from you directly, but some general reluctance to have campaigners involved in discussions about how things might change. And it feels like that we're sort of being dismissed because we're amateurs, or we're expert amateurs. But if there is a feeling that expert amateurs should not be in the room when Amy and the council are discussing and formulating a way forward that's going to then be presented to us to approve or not, can we at least have some of those experts that have voluntarily come forward over the last few years in those discussions? So, for example, if you look at the STAG website, there are numerous experts quoted there who have come out in public, who have voluntarily come forward and offered their expertise, and given their opinion. You know, we haven't gone and found them. They've heard about this, and about how Sheffield is mismanaging its street trees, and they're horrified, and they come out in public and say, and give their expertise. And you know, there are arboricultural experts and highways experts who have publicly offered to come and talk to the council and assist, and have, you know, there's been no response. So it would be really good if maybe, you know, even if you don't want the expert amateurs in the room, maybe you could approach some of those people and ask them to come in and help Amy and the council formulate a new way forward. So I guess they might be general sense to us, but they would be, as Annette said, at the moment, if it's Amy and the council, it's the same people with the same blinkers on.
And the same misinformation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So please bring in those external experts, and if you want a sample of them, just look at the STAG website for examples of assorted, you people, and contact Chris Rust. He can give you list as long as his arm of people who I'm sure would be willing to give their advice and expertise.
So to work through those questions, and I mean the important place to start, and I want to take the opportunity of Rebecca's question to set out some of my thinking a bit more on this. But this isn't a closed shop, because it's an elected local authority working within the rule of law, working within the framework of our constitutional democracy in finding a way forward. And that's a very important point to start on, because one of the things that I'm considering carefully in conversation with representatives of different groups is about the best process you can have for bringing differently constituted parties together over this issue. The council, at the end of the day, is governed by its elected councillors and is accountable to its elected councillors. And so there's a question about what is the best process for engaging with a section of civil society. When I say a section of civil society, that might be larger, smaller, but not representing the city as a whole in the way the council is charged with. So I very much want different groups and different stakeholders. Constituted charities have different role in this and have different accountability mechanisms. And this is partly a question for yourselves as well, about how you want to take part in this and take part in the talks that happen. And I think there are some subtle points about how we actually work through. And I've had, to be honest, I've had some very different ideas presented to me about the proper way of doing this. There's not a single, I've not been presented with a single, a unified proposal for how talks should take place. I've had different ideas which I want to consider, and consider about local authorities' role in engaging with them. So Annette's two questions. I mean, I think there's a probably perfectly innocent explanation to the anecdote you related. I mean, there was a period between which I was nominated and I took up office, and in that time Brian was still the cabinet member for Environment and Street Scene and still had responsibilities to the city. He was still a cabinet member for Environment and Street Scene as part of our administration, and that's the important thing. It's about how us as an administration and as a council as a whole have got a change of direction to take place.
That's not clear to me. Have you taken his role and you're now attending those meetings?
So I attend all relevant meetings and I access all relevant information. And I've said this clearly in our full council meeting. As I said before, I'm not a contract lawyer, I'm not a highways expert. The council has professionals to do this. I am there to govern the council with my colleagues and put our policies into practice. So I refute the sort of assumption that for me to read the contract is a necessary first step. For me, the necessary step is to understand the choices available and what we can do to move forward. So, and this is.
You don't think it's necessary? Just to reiterate, you don't think it's necessary for you to read the contract?
It's absolutely necessary for me to understand the options available, guided by
you
advice
don't think you should have
policies.
sight of the contract?
I mean, so there's 2 points here. Is a lot of contract is published, and I've also, as I said on Radio Sheffield last week, I've asked officers to look again to see what more they can publish, because I understand this is a point of concern to groups around the city. However, for me, the important thing is to understand the choices available for how we work.
This is another problem, isn't it? Because it takes us 6 months and then the intervention of the Information Commissioner to give us confirmation of that 17,500 figure. So we've got that information, but you don't think you need to see the contract. So unless we force that out into the open, you wouldn't know what the number was now, would you?
Well, and we've had a difference of interpretation about that number, where I'm,
I want to know that that's written down in the contract, and I want to know that the elected representative for the people of Sheffield dealing with this policy area has looked at that contract and read what's in it and taken advice if there are things they don't understand. That's what I want to do. I'd like you to have sight of the basic contract and to have read it. That would give me more confidence that we knew what we're actually talking about, because a lot of this feels like you're trying to knit fog, because we haven't actually seen what's there.
Okay, well, can I draw that to a close with,
Yeah.
by saying, I can only try my best with this to do it the way that I think is right. I think the right thing to do is to access all the information, go to all the relevant meetings necessary to put the policy that I'm going to outline into practice. I'm developing my ideas about what policy we need by going out and meeting groups like yourself and meeting with residents and thinking about how we move forward. And that's how I'm going to approach it. So
I've got some options, if you want. Because, I mean, if you're looking for options, I mean, I don't see that there are many options. To stop that mess. That's all. You need to ask Julie, who's put me in place, what's her real intentions. Because what we get actions and then justifications. We don't get explanations or we don't get any action on the ground from principles or from explanation. You're talking about rebuilding a community. What you don't see is that the community happens here. These people, I didn't know anyone here before, I mean, 6 months ago. And I had no intention of. I was just wanting to wander around and everything. And in 6 months, I got to know these people. This is a community. The council have become far away from the community, not the council. Actually, most of the councillors are part of that community. There's just a few. I'll name them if you want. I mean, this is Julie and Paul Billington and Lodge, who's gone already, but the other ones will go as well. In 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, and they'll be forgotten. Well, no, they won't be forgotten, maybe. But you have a role and a position that's very important, and you can reverse all this. This is not about parliamentary or sending someone to talk to because Julie doesn't want to talk at all, or because Paul Billington is even not on the social media. Ooh, fantastic! You know, that's how convenient. You're not here to parliament with us or to talk to us. Julie Dorr put you here just to entertain people, maybe.
well, again, but the short answer to that is I think that I can do everything I need to do to find a way forward. We're working with Julie and the cabinet.
You say as a statement, the people in the communities are not happy. This mess will stop, and do it on the press. The Julie Dorr will not have anything against you, and that will solve everything. Okay. This is the option. And then you can organize talks and things and all. Stop first, then we talk. Because this is what the council and Emily are doing. They act first, then say, oh, sorry, we didn't know that tree wasn't healthy. Oh, sorry, that curb wasn't, in fact, we won't repair it. This is all about integrity. And none of them do have integrity. None of them at court swear on their oath. None of them swear from on top of their voice. They look at their shoes. They don't even know what they're swearing on. They're playing a role. And if you play with them, along with them, they'll get you in their game. This is what it is about. Do you want options? Stop it all now. That's it. Stop it all now and tell that Julie Dorr to go to the press and go to tell the press that they've never given you all the truth. They've always been hiding things. They're not answering to their oath. They don't even know their oath. They're not respecting it. And they put you in a difficult position because you've got to butter them.
So it's 9:30. Do you want to make the final point to maybe respond to that and summarise?
Okay. Well, like I've just said, what I want to conclude on is by saying, I would ask you not to worry about questions like does Julie Dorr agree with you? Does the cabinet agree with you? Because I think.
We know she doesn't.
I'm here with the full support of Julie Dorr, and I'm here with the full support of my cabinet colleagues and my Labour councillor colleagues, because the right thing to do now is to try and find a compromise from all sides that lets us move forward as a city, and so that's the point from which we can have a constructive engagement over the summer to find how we can move forward by bringing different ideas to the table about how the work goes. And I've listened carefully as I've been going around, and I've seen what people feel about the current proposals and where they see a need for a different.
No, we don't want proposals.
The proposals that were previously put by Amy, which you're familiar. We discussed them when we walked about. I understand people's concerns about these, and when
What are those? What proposals by who when?
Yeah, what?
sorry, this is the proposals that have been previously been brought forward about tree replacement.
You mean the old existing tree? Oh, well, yeah, of course.
Okay, right, sorry, I mean, but here, look, I mean, this is why we need to be speaking face to face, this is why we need to be building up trust between each other.
But we
We've
do
been
need
going-
it to be clear, so that
Yeah.
we understand what you're talking about.
Yeah.
I'm trying to be as clear as possible in saying I've taken on board views from people as we've been going about. You know, we've focused on some of the wider issues tonight, and there will be an opportunity over the summer for us to focus on some of the more concrete issues when we bring forward a fresh set of proposals. That will be a starting point for the dialogue that's going to take place. And so I'm going to be continuing to engage with different groups and different residents and parts of the city to consider how best to put that into practice. And I'm absolutely optimistic that we can find a resolution that lets us move forward. Within a few years, and then within the next 20 years, we can work out a way of working constructively together.
I can't wait 20 years.
It's nothing
Well,
constructive.
as I say,
Don't be clear and decisive.
I don't-
We're
what
low
I-
patience.
well, what I've said. Yeah, I didn't say wait 20 years. I said this summer we're going to try and find a way forward that will last for 20 years. We're protecting our tree stocks. So, yes, I'm afraid that we're going to have to wrap up. I mean, I agree with Paul that I'll be here for an hour and then let you carry on with your meeting. We will have another opportunity to talk. And we've had previous opportunities to talk.
We're trying to find out what you're going to do, what's happening to the street, and what you're trying to find out. Is there anything happening? Are they going to still come out?
That's what we're going to bring forward over the summer.
So, but over the summer, during that period, are they going to still come out, or are you going to, while they're coming, you're still trying to decide, or what's happening? They're not coming until you decide, right? Until you find out what you're going to do.
Well, we're working out, we're reviewing the options, and we're working out we're coming up with a good starting point for that discussion.
Yeah.
So why are you doing that?
Just focus on this a bit, right? Project management perspective. What's the schedule when you're producing proposals? You must have a deadline.
Well, we don't have a deadline. I want to bring forward proposals when I'm happy that they seem to reflect views I've heard and will be a best starting point.
So the pause continues until the proposals are produced?
That's
Yeah.
September,
And-
fences and stuff.
Yeah, it's because the problem is, just to be honest, if I was in a project management meeting, I'd be very concerned right now because I'm not hearing any measures of success being set. All I'm just hearing the word is proposals. I'm not hearing a schedule. I'm not hearing a timeline. I'm not hearing set meetings.
I mean, we do have to tie things up.
Sorry.
To reassure you, just to speak for Lewis, in terms of everything I've heard from Lewis and others,
Okay.
that pause will continue until a proposal is made that the council and officers indeed now believe it will make us go away. Yeah? That doesn't mean it's going to be a brilliant proposal initially. It could be a mixed one, it could be an okay one, but there'll be some negotiations and then something will happen. But basically the pause will continue until something is sensible enough to be proposed. If, for example, like Amy came back and said we're going to save 2 trees, then clearly Lewis wouldn't propose that. But if it's, let's say it's 60%, 70%, 80% of the trees, then clearly that's started to get to something more sensible, isn't it? That we might not accept, but it's started to get something more
I just think
sensible.
for a timeline, so a lot of people here
There
have
isn't one.
endured a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety, who are under threat right now, who probably like Lewis, a little bit more structure in what you're putting together, and that would probably drop people's stress because they're getting some answers back.
And that is a fair point. But all I can say there is I'm not here as a project manager or as an employee or working on this. I'm here holding public office as an elected politician to try and find a way forward. And I just ask for you to take it very seriously when we say we've got a pause, we're going to bring proposals forward, we're going to talk about them. This really isn't about delaying things till the end of next season or
We're
anything.
equally adamant that our case is as strong as it's ever been, and we're not going away. Yeah?
Thank you.
So please
So can I
relay
wrap
that
up on the
back.
point of saying thank you very much for expressing the views.
Can the council stop sending out threatening letters to people?
Can they stop
Well, we
Yeah, the deadline is
yeah.
Thursday.
Well, we have touched
Yeah, you have
upon
to
this.
actually, I can understand the injunction part, but why do you have to threaten the people if they don't sign it?
Thursday.
Well, that's, as I understand it, that's part of the process.
Was it better to just deal with the injunction separately?
Just intimidation.
Intimidation.
I disagree, but that's the point of disagreement.
You're not in receipt of a letter, right? You haven't seen these letters, you're being intimidated. You were intimidated last year with threats of being bankrupted, like I was, like he was. Prison.
Have you seen the letter?
I think you need to pay attention to the experience we're having.
If you would like to see a copy of the letter, I have mine here. And you're more than willing to.
Lewis, may I propose as a Labour Party member that you
Well,
actually
I think
make a statement
there's
to
a Labour
withdraw
Party.
the injunction
I think
tonight?
as Labour Party, comrades in the Labour Party, we can have a conversation in the Labour Party about what the Labour
But
Party
could you?
should do.
But
Lewis,
this is destroying us, Lewis.
Right.
And
So-
really, as Labour Party, as socialists, we don't actually invoke the courts against peaceful protesters. These are people who are decent folk. If I was you, the first thing that I would do now is say, as the Cabinet Member for Environment, I would stand up and condemn the injunctions that have been given out last week. And I wouldn't care if Julie Dore thought that was bad news, and I wouldn't care if half the Labour Party in Sheffield cared it was bad news. Because what I would do is I'd stand up and I would say, we stop it now. As a socialist, stop it now. And that would rebuild the trust, or some of it, that has completely gone. It wouldn't solve the problem, but I would say, on a personal basis, and if Julie wanted to summon me into the office tomorrow morning and say, I'm not having that, Lewis, because you went out of order, I would take it on the chin. Because I think it is appalling that members of the Labour Council stand up at Orgreave Truth and Justice meetings and go on about the miners, they go on about Kinder Scout, and yet right on our doorstep now, and I apologise for my frustration, right on our doorstep now, who are in pieces because of an injunction that your officers issued last week. Condemn it now. In fact, I ask that the two Netheredge councillors condemn it tonight as well.
Thank you for expressing your views again, Mark. The views you expressed last Thursday when we discussed this last Thursday. And as I said then, look, we can only do what we think is the right thing to do. You have a difference of opinion with me on this.
Well, I've been brave and I've put it out in public as a Labour Party member. I condemn the Labour Council for issuing those court injunctions last week. If I can be brave to do it, I think the three of you, as representatives of Sheffield City Council, should be equally brave and condemn them as well.
And the alternative for Labour is a new political landscape in the future
Absolutely.
for Sheffield.
I've got another
Mark my
alternative.
words.
What do you want to? I mean, I'll just sum this up. I've covered these points and the questions we've got. We have been elected. We're trying to do what we think is the right thing to do. I'd ask you to take it in good faith that if you disagree with what we're doing, you take it in good faith when I say to you, I'm not coming here and telling you stuff because Julie's told me to come. I agree with Julie on the way forward, and Julie is supporting me. That is a non-issue. The issue at hand is what we can do constructively together. And I've tried to answer the points you've raised. This point's come up. I think some of the people have been late.
We've
midway
made a
through the meeting.
request. I think the request is to withdraw the injunctions, and then I think we can all go
Well,
forward in
and
a
I'll just
positive
be
way.
clear on that, which is we're not in a position yet where the injunction can be lapsed. And
Hang on. There is a misunderstanding here, folks. There hasn't been an injunction. There have been threatening letters. Now, the council could go ahead, bring in an injunction against persons unknown. It would apply to everyone in this room. There'd be no problem. You could still have the legal protection. You don't have to send really unpleasant, threatening letters to individuals just to intimidate them. That's the only reason there is, just to
Have you
intimidate
seen
them.
the letter, Lewis?
I agree. So can I just summarise?
Not about the injunction.
Can I
read the letter to me last week.
So I think, Lewis is perfectly entitled to have a completely different view about whether the injunction should be extended or whatever. But Chris and others are absolutely right in terms of the way it's been done. The letters that were sent out, the tight deadline, I suspect there was a different way of doing it. And I think that's where you need to just reflect. You don't have to answer now, but you think you need to reflect and have a think about whether that's the sort of stuff you want to be doing again in the future, because that's the sort of stuff that
we wrap up on that point, and I will take that back.
Can I finish on one particularly more positive point, which is not related to what we just talked about. Earlier I talked about bringing in external expertise.
Okay.
I really cannot reiterate enough the importance of bringing in external independent expertise when you're drawing up your alternative plans with Amy, because I think that will give a whole lot more credibility to whatever plans you come up with. Seriously, even if you don't want us in the room, get those external experts in and let us see the input that they have had, because if we see that some independent minds have contributed to and agreed with the plans, whatever they are, that will give a whole lot more credibility than something that has only been cooked up between Amy and the council.
Brilliant. Okay. Well, thanks for being in touch with you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
So, after that excitement,
Don't put them down.